Facing a 3-bet. Decision stack when you face a 3-bet. When you face a 3-bet online, you have 3 options: fold, call, or 4-bet. Your job is to choose the highest expected value branch, fast enough for multi-tabling, and accurate enough to survive rake drag. Start with math. Then layer in range, geometry, position, and node-specific population tendencies from tracking software. First, pot odds, required equity now. Second, equity realization. R, how much of your equity you convert to expected value post-flop. Third, range shape, linear versus polarized ranges and how they collide. Fourth, MDF, how much you must defend to avoid auto profit versus bluffs. Fifth, capped versus uncapped, who has the nut advantage after your choice. Sixth, blockers and unblockers, how your hand changes, villain's value, bluffs, and continue frequency. Hope-based calls, set mining without odds, and passive pre-flop lines are where win rates die in online pools. TPP exploit framework. First, the exploit versus high 3-bet and low fold to 4-bet. Tighten your calls and 4-bet more for value. Second, the risk. Over-tightening gives up too much MDF, you get run over by polar 3-betters. Third, the counter. If they reduce 3-bet frequency, reopen suited calls and remove light 4-bets. Pot odds, required equity, and the real threshold. Pot odds are the entry fee. Required equity is the minimum raw equity you need if you realized 100% of it. You never realize 100% when you call a 3-bet, especially OOP. That is why equity realization, R, is the real threshold. Use this template. First, pot odds required equity equals call divided by pot after you call. Second, real required equity equals pot odds, equity divided by R. Example 100 big blinds. Cutoff opens 2.5 big blinds, big blind. 3 bets to 9 big blinds, you call 6.5 big blinds. First, pot before call, 2.5 plus 9 plus 1.5 blinds, and rate cap effects ignored equals 13 big blinds. Second, pot after call, 19.5 big blinds. Third, pot odds equity, 6.5 divided by 19.5 equals 33.3%. Now apply R. IP, you might realize 0.85 to 0.95. OOP, you might realize 0.65 to 0.80. First, IP real threshold. 33.3 divided by 0.90 equals 37.0%. Second, OOP real threshold. 33.3 divided by 0.75 equals 44.4%. This is why marginal suited hands that look playable on paper bleed. Expected value in practice when you are OOP. TPP exploit framework. First, the exploit. In rake-heavy pools, raise your equity threshold for calls, especially OOP. Second, the risk. If you fold too much, competent regulars increase 3-bet bluff volume. Third, the counter. Add back calls with strong realizers, then 4-bet bluff with clean blockers. Range geometry versus a 3-bet. 3-bet ranges are either linear versus polarized ranges. Your response depends on which one you are facing. Linear 3-bets are dense and value heavy. Think many medium-strong hands, less trash. Polarized 3-bets are top value plus bluffs. The middle is removed. First, versus linear versus polarized ranges that are linear, call less with dominated offsuit broadways like King-Jack offsuit. Second, versus linear versus polarized ranges that are polarized, call more with hands that realize well and punish bluffs, like 8-7 suited. Range geometry also determines who is capped versus uncapped after you call. First, if you never 4-bet pocket queens, and better, your calling range is capped. Villain stays uncapped. Second, if you mix some traps and some 4-bet value, your call range becomes less capped. In online pools, capped ranges get punished by high C-bet frequency and high turn barreling. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit. Identify pool shape with tracking software versus linear. 3 bets, Titan dominated continues. Second, the risk. Overfolding lets them print with any sizing and any 2 bluffs. Third, the counter. If they polarize more, increase suited calls and add 4-bet bluffs with blockers. MDF and the minimum you must continue. MDF keeps you from folding so much that villain profits with automatic bluffs. Preflop you approximate it by comparing your open size and their 3-bet size, then choosing a defend frequency that stops free money. Practical heuristic for multi-tabling, then refine with solver work. First, versus a normal big blind 3-bet size, you defend a meaningful chunk of your open, often 45 to 60% in position. Second, OOP, your defend shrinks, because R collapses and rake drag punishes marginal calls. Do not use MDF as permission to call. MDF is a guardrail. Your actual action is driven by expected value with R. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit versus opponents with low. 3-bet bluffing, defend below theoretical MDF and punish with 4-bet value. Second, the risk. If you auto-under-defend, strong regulars can 3-bet any 2 at high frequency. Third, the counter. If they increase bluffing, meet it with more calls IP and more 4-bet bluffs. Call or 4-bet, build the right, continue range. Your continue range has 2 buckets, call hands that realize, 4-bet hands that deny equity and pressure bluffs. Calling creates a 3-bet pot. Your post-flop plan must exist now, not after the flop. 4-betting compresses ranges and increases fold equity. It also protects you from being capped. First, 4-bet for value, hands that are comfortably ahead of their 3-bet value region, like pocket queens and better, and often ace-king. Second, 4-bet bluff, hands with strong blockers and unblockers, like ace-5 suited through ace-2 suited and sometimes king-10 suited. Third, call, hands with strong realization and playability, like pocket 10s through pocket jacks, ace-queen suited through ace-jack suited, and suited connectors such as 8-7 suited when IP versus polar. Fourth, fold, hands that are dominated and realize poorly, like king-jack offsuit OOP versus linear. Blockers and unblockers is not a meme. An ace blocker removes villains ace-king and pocket aces combos, increasing 4-bet fold equity. Unblock their folding region. If they 3-bet bluff with suited junk, hands like ace-5 suited through ace-2 suited do not block it. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit. If pool overfolds to 4 bets, widen 4-bet bluff with clean blockers and tighten calls. Second, the risk. If you 4-bet too much, you isolate yourself versus strong continues and torch expected value. Third, the counter. If they start 5-betting more, reduce bluff 4 bets and shift to calls with high R hands. IP standard, cutoff or button versus big blind. IP, you realize equity. Your calls can be wider. Your 4-bets can be more disciplined. Your baseline plan versus big blind in most online pools looks like this. First, call more suited hands that can float and pressure turns, like 8-7 suited and ace-jack suited. Second, fold offsuit hands that get dominated and face tough turns, like king-jack offsuit and queen-10 offsuit. Third, 4-bet more value when big blind is linear and wide, less bluffing. Fourth, 4-bet more bluffs when big blind is polar and overfolds. If you are IP and still losing in 3-bet pots, your leak is usually calling too wide with low R hands, then playing fit or fold. Scenario box. Hero, 8 of spades, 7 of spades on button. Flop, King of clubs, 5 of hearts, 3 of spades. Action, button opens 2.5 big blinds. Big blind, 3 bets to 9 big blinds. Button calls. Big blind C is 25% pot. IP with 8-7. Suited, you can float at frequency versus small C bet because you have backdoors and you deny auto profit. Your plan is not hope. Your plan is to attack capped lines on later streets when big blind gives up. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit versus small bet range bets, float wider. IP, then overbluff turn cards that favor your range. Second, the risk. If you overfloat, you get barreled off equity and lose rake, heavy small pots. Third, the counter. If they start double barreling more, tighten floats and raise more strong draws. OOP tough spots. Small blind versus button 3 bet. OOP your R drops. Your 3-bet pot becomes a guessing game if you call hands that cannot fight. When you open small blind and button 3 bets, your default response is more 4-bet or fold. Calling is narrow. First, call hands with strong realization, like pocket jacks through pocket queens and ace queen suited, if button is polar and not too large. Second, fold hands like king jack offsuit that get dominated and cannot realize OOP. Third, be careful with set mining hands like pocket fours. If stacks are not deep and the 3-bet is large, the math fails. Set mining is only valid when the implied odds are real and you can actually get paid. Online pools do not pay off enough when you play face up. Scenario box. Hero. 4 of clubs. 4 of hearts in small blind. Flop. Queen of spades, 9 of clubs, 2 of hearts. Action. Small blind opens 2.5 big blinds. Button 3. Bets to 10 big blinds. Small blind calls. Button C bets 33% pot. With pocket fours OOP, you miss too often, and your implied odds get taxed by rake drag. Default is fold pre-flop unless stacks are deep and button is loose and sticky. If you do call, you need a plan for turns. Pure check fold on every miss is hope poker. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit versus big sizing and high C bets. Cut low pocket pair calls OOP and 4-bet more value. Second, the risk. If you remove too many calls, your range becomes too 4-bet heavy and easy to play against. Third, the counter. If they adjust by flatting more opens, widen steals, and reduce 4-bet bluffs. Multiway and squeeze logic. Multiway changes everything. When there is an open and a call, then you face a squeeze. Required equity goes up. Ranges are tighter. Reverse implied odds increase. Your suited hands suffer when you cannot realize cleanly. First, call squeezes tighter with hands like king jack offsuit and pocket fours, especially OOP. Second, prefer 4-bet or fold when the squeezer is aggressive and the sizing is large. Third, use tracking software stats like squeeze percent and fold to 4-bet to choose bluffs. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit versus squeeze. Happy regulars, 4-bet, more with blockers and trap more with strong value. Second, the risk. If you over 4-bet, you get shoved on and lose expected value with bluffs. Third, the counter. If they stop squeezing, revert to standard open call structures and post-flop edge. Fast heuristics for online pools. You need rules that work at speed. These are the ones that survive in high-volume environments. First, if you are OOP and your hand is dominated and offsuit, default to fold, like king-jack offsuit. Second, if you are IP and the 3-bet range is polar, call more suited connected hands like 8-7 suited. Third, if villain's 3-bet is small, you can call wider. If it is large, tighten hard because R collapses. Fourth, if villain overfolds to 4 bets, print with ace. 5 suited through ace. 2 suited and remove marginal calls. Fifth, do not set mine with pocket fours unless stacks and opponent tendencies actually pay you. TPP Exploit Framework. First, the exploit. Use pool heuristics to build a default that wins before you even exploit. Second, the risk. Autopiloting heuristics without opponent data can leak expected value versus outliers. Third, the counter. When a regular deviates, update your frequencies and lock in new baselines. Key takeaway: facing a 3-bet. You do not call a 3-bet because your hand looks playable. You call because pot odds plus equity realization, R, make it profitable. Then you protect your range with the right mix of calls and 4-bets built around linear versus polarized ranges, MDF, capped versus uncapped dynamics, and blockers and unblockers. Now, let's test your edge. Question 1. What are the 3 preflop options the article lists when you face a 3-bet online? Answer: fold, call, or 4-bet. Explanation: the article frames facing a 3-bet as a 3-branch decision tree, and your goal is choosing the highest expected value branch. Question 2. Using the template in the article, if pot odds required equity is 33.3% and your equity realization, R, is 0.75, what is the real required equity to call? Answer: 44.4. Explanation: real required equity equals pot odds equity divided by R, 33.3% divided by 0.75 equals 4.4%. Question 3. According to the article, why is equity realization, R, the real threshold when calling a 3-bet, especially out of position? Answer: because you don't realize 100% of your raw equity. When you call a 3-bet, and OOP realization drops even more. Explanation: pot odds show the entry fee, but expected value depends on the fraction of equity you can actually convert post-flop, which is lower OOP. Question 4. How does the article recommend adjusting your calls versus a linear 3-bet range compared to a polarized 3-bet range? Answer: versus linear 3-bets, tighten dominated continues, versus polarized 3-bets, call more hands that realize well and punish bluffs. Explanation: linear ranges are dense and value-heavy, making dominated hands perform badly, while polarized ranges include bluffs that suited, playable hands can pressure. Question 5. What does the article say MDF is and is not used for when defending versus a 3-bet? Answer: MDF is a guardrail to avoid over-folding to bluffs, not permission to call. Actual action is driven by expected value with R. Explanation: the article warns that MDF prevents auto-profit bluffs, but you should still filter continues through equity realization and profitability. Study hard, play smart. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next lesson.